Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.
Carrie?
Hi, Sonia.
Carrie, I feel like we're all getting into a groove of wanting to spend a little less time in the kitchen.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things I love about the seasons changing is that new produce comes in, old produce goes out. But I think every time a season changes, we always have need for these quick meals. And I still want to be eating seasonally.
I definitely think that spring produce in particular welcomes in very quick cooking and easy meals. And that's what we're here to talk about. We can never have enough 30-minute meals. Life is busy. Sometimes you want to cook a big meal and host and spend a lot of time in the kitchen. And sometimes you just need to get dinner on the table.
And I think it also helps all of us home cooks think about when I need to get a quick meal on the table. What are the things that you can turn to, like a vegetable that cooks really quickly, a stir fry that you know cooks really quickly. If you're making a stir fry, the rice is the 30 minutes. So you start there and then you make something quickly and you can be sitting down in 30 minutes.
Yeah, you're right. Stir fries can often take half the time of your rice. And that's the perfect segue to the first recipe I want to share with you, which is a kind of stir fry. And I also think stir fries for me can get boring. Like I'll get stuck into my same stir fry routine. So I love finding ones that are a little more different. And this is a turmeric black pepper chicken with asparagus, one of my favorite spring vegetables, as you know. And it's by Ali Slagle for the New York Times. And it's a 15-minute recipe.
Okay, my confession is I also looked at that recipe because it is seasonal and everyone needs a great stir fry recipe. And also turmeric, whenever I see anything that has turmeric, it makes me think of you because you always talk about the lovely warm flavor of turmeric.
It's so earthy. It
Yes.
makes things so golden. Paired with black pepper. Apparently, you need to pair it with black pepper to experience its nutritional benefits. That's something I've learned about turmeric. It needs to be combined with that. So
Really?
I love, yeah.
I didn't know this.
It increases the bioavailability. It's a natural antioxidant. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. But I love the flavor. And I do think it's interesting. Things that combine naturally really well flavor-wise often do have these nutritional benefits. And turmeric and black pepper really pair well together. That little bit of heat with that earthy, golden sweetness. So for this recipe, it's as simple as can be. You stir together some water with a little honey and pepper and salt to make a kind of sauce. You set that aside. And then you stir together some flour, some turmeric, and some salt. And you could use a gluten-free flour for this if you wanted. That would totally work. You add the chicken to that flour. So if you actually want it crispier, starch, cornstarch, or potato starch, or tapioca flour would make it even crispier. You heat up your skillet. You add your floured and spiced chicken to the pan. And there's great little details like cook until the turmeric is fragrant. So you do really smell that spice. And then you're cooking the chicken. I didn't mention this. She calls for boneless, skinless chicken thighs cut into 1-inch pieces. The advantage of a boneless, skinless chicken thigh here is it's less likely to dry out than a chicken breast. However, if you really want to use a chicken breast, you absolutely could.
So it is quick cooking. It's really not gonna, yeah. You just don't leave it in your pan too long. Do you have a wok that you use or I would probably turn to my cast iron here, right?
Yeah, she says a nonstick skillet. I would do it in my cast iron as well.
Yeah, I would do it in my cast iron. Listen, as a person who didn't grow up eating, I don't think any turmeric, what I've really learned from you is the quality that you're getting really makes a difference. And so
That's a good point.
the turmeric that you gifted to me, it was from the
Diaspora Co.
Diaspora Company. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think once you made me aware of that, and then, I traveled to India with my friend Jamie and seeing turmeric that they have just ground and the color of that, the flavor that you get out of that, what we're really talking about is a very simple protein, a very simple vegetable, and an incredible spice that you can get a lot of flavor out in just 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's one spice and salt and pepper most people have in their pantry.
Right.
You can also get turmeric in the bulk spice section of like a natural food store if you don't want to have a ton on hand. I like diaspora co's turmeric. I also like burlap and barrel's turmeric.
Right.
There's certainly some other great ones on the market. Those are just two that I happen to gravitate towards. So you cook your chicken on both sides, lightly dust it with flour. Then after just 3 minutes, you add in asparagus that you've just sliced into bite-sized pieces, and you cook it for another 1 to 2 minutes. That's all it takes for that asparagus to get cooked. Because asparagus you can even eat raw and it will be fine. And then you add that honey, water, black pepper mixture to the pan. And that hot pan with that residual little bit of starchiness from the flour will start making a thick sauce like you'd expect in a great takeout dish.
Right. I didn't even, because I was kind of like, where are you going with this water
Yeah.
starch?
It's a good trick too when you have a soy sauce based sauce. Like if you're making
Yes.
another, just a simple stir fry, I always add water to those because otherwise it would be really overwhelmingly salty, but you do need a little more liquid to have enough sauce to coat all of your protein or vegetables. And so at the very end, you turn off the heat, you add some vinegar and some soy sauce to this for flavor. She also recommends squeezing it with lime juice. All of this can be happening in 15 minutes, and your rice will probably just be finished by the time you're done adding the final ingredients.
It's a quick meal that also has a seasonal ingredient. At this point in the year, you can get asparagus at any grocery store as well as at your local farmer's market. Well, Sonia, this might make you laugh, but I also have a stir fry and asparagus dish that I want to talk
All
about.
right.
And it's a skirt steak. When I was a personal chef, I made a lot of skirt steak stir fries. There was this really great Cooks Illustrated recipe that I would use. It was a very simple method-based recipe. And this recipe that I'm talking about today is from Martha Stewart, and it has a lot of similar vibes. You get a piece of skirt steak, you cut it into your bite-sized pieces, you heat up your skillet, you add a little bit of oil, you lay the steak down so each of the little pieces of steak has a little bit of space so that it's getting seared and it's not steaming. And then you add a little bit more oil to the pan. You add some ginger, some chilies, some scallion. If you don't want to have chilies, just leave them out. Maybe add a couple of red pepper flakes. Add your asparagus that's been cut into bite-sized pieces, sort of toss that around. Add some lime on as well. And then you finish it off with some toasted peanuts, which adds a really
Mm.
nice dimension to,
Hmm.
to your stir fry.
I love a toasted peanut on top of almost anything. I
Yes,
really
yes.
love peanuts, but I love that you're talking about skirt steak specifically. That was also on my mind for this topic because of all the cuts of steak. It is so forgiving to be cooked quickly. It doesn't tend to be too chewy. It's like a thinner cut, so it cooks so fast. It can be really tender very easily, and I think that's what you want when you're doing a quick meal.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that too, because a lot of times people think that skirt steak and flank steak are very interchangeable. And in a lot of ways, they are. I find that flank steak has a lot less fat, and I prefer the fatty flavor of the skirt steak. I would not recommend using flank steak in this.
Well, that's a really helpful tip too, because I do think people think they're totally interchangeable. And again, the whole idea is to take a simple protein, whether it's chicken or steak or tofu, add it with some asparagus and a few little flavor boosters. In my case, it was turmeric. In your case, having that peanut and lime at the end can make all the difference. Another one of my go-to quick weeknight meals is some kind of meatball or meat patty. Certainly like a burger is an easy weeknight meal. And in our house, a very common Soviet recipe is kotlety or Ukrainian recipe, which are like little kind of meat patties. And some of them are quicker than others, but actually, the other week, I was cooking for one of my clients and they had picked up a really good package of ground lamb. And I was like, oh, what could I make a meal out of this that their teenage daughter would like? Because lamb isn't always for everyone. If I can make it into a really good meatball and make kind of a Mediterranean dinner, I also made chicken just in case the daughter didn't like the lamb. And I also made just a really simple Greek style salad with cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers. And then a tahini sauce that took 2 seconds to make. Tahini tahini and water whisked together. So this is really a 30-minute meal because these lamb meatballs, the recipe I'm going to share is for 30-minute lamb meatballs. They cook really quick. They don't take a lot of time to make. Having said that, I know that for some people, rolling meatballs might take a little more time than others.
I feel like meatballs have this promise of being easy and quick, and I find that they're not. I have a group of friends who, many of whom are Persian, they call it cutlet or cutlet,
Yeah.
and it's the same idea. I sort of learned about meatballs through like a more Italian tradition of you make a panade and you add all the things and there's all these additions. And I think what you're really talking about is a good ground protein, like ground lamb. It has its own flavor, and then just directly adding a couple of spices to that, rolling it out and being done with it.
Everyone's 15 minutes looks a little different. Let's be honest. No
Yes,
recipe
true.
developer can tell you exactly how long something is going to take.
Uh,
For some people, a 15-minute recipe could take 45 minutes because they're getting just starting out cooking and they shouldn't feel bad about that. And for someone who cooks every single day, a 15-minute recipe will really feel like a 15-minute recipe. So for me, making meatballs for many years, it just feels easy. But even if it's not exactly 30 minutes, it might still feel easy-ish because you're cooking these in the oven. And it's something you and I both really feel strongly about, which is if you pop a meatball into the oven, it kind of takes a lot of the work out of it. I think searing the meatballs and browning them in a pan takes more time, more effort. It
And
splatters oil
it creates
everywhere.
so much more mess. I mean, I think that was something I learned from, we've mentioned this before, the Meatball Shop cookbook, which I bought because I would go to
Yes.
the meatball shop in New York and I really loved their meatballs. One of the first things that they say when you open up their cookbook, which I think is a funny thing to repeat, but it's like, we bake our balls. That's what they say. And getting permission from a place that specializes in meatballs that you bake them, it's kind of how I felt when I learned that you could bake bacon instead of frying it in a frying pan.
And in this recipe I'm sharing from Recipe 10 Eats, she has you roast them in the oven. And during that time, she has you make a sauce too. So this really is meant
Yeah.
to be like towards a complete meal that you serve with pita bread, which you can just buy at the store and heat up as well in the oven while your meatballs are heating up. So it's not a ton of ingredients. It's ground lamb. You could certainly use ground beef if you didn't like lamb. You could even use ground dark meat turkey here. You take a small onion. This is a really important step for all the meatballs I like to make, which is you grate the onion on a box grater. Or you could pulse it in one of those tiny food processors if you have like a chopper or one of those.
Yeah,
Because
but I
that
wouldn't do that because I find those to be so annoying to clean.
it's like whatever, pick your
Yes,
poison. Like if
fair
you
enough. Yes.
yeah, but that kind of the extra juice from the grated onion is actually going to help create tenderness to the meatball and add so much more onion flavor than if you just dice it. You also add panko breadcrumbs, an egg, some garlic. I like to grate mine on a microplane, but you could do a garlic press if that's what you have. Some chopped up cilantro, or you could use parsley, a little bit of coriander, and a hint of either cinnamon or cayenne. She recommends a few different spices. You just roll those into balls. I think that takes the most time of anything, but I think that will take you about 10 minutes. Truthfully, it's not a huge amount of meat. You put that on a sheet pan and you pop it in the oven. In 20 minutes, they're cooked. While your meatballs are cooking in the oven for 20 minutes, you could make tahini sauce. You could make this minted yogurt sauce that she suggests. You could make tzatziki sauce if that's what you enjoy. You could put together a salad. You could heat up your pitas. You could also make a pot of rice if that was what you were feeling like. And then you could have these Mediterranean inspired bowls or sandwiches with these meatballs.
First of all, I love the way that she writes recipes because she writes recipes with such intention. There was another recipe that of hers that I read recently where she's recommended grating your onion because to your point, it adds a lot more moisture and tenderness and flavor. And also using a microplane for your garlic, that adds a packed amount of flavor to something that's very quick cooking.
That's not in her recipe. She just says crushed garlic, but I
Okay.
do think in a meatball microplaning, because,
Yes. You don't
and,
want a
and
chunk of garlic.
also, the way garlic changes flavor with a garlic press versus a microplane versus chopped, it actually does taste a little bit different. I find you get the best flavor for a meatball from the microplane.
Yeah, I agree. And the meatballs are packed with flavor, but what makes a meatball fun is eating it with some kind of sauce. There's a lot of different ways that you can go. And maybe this is a day when you have some leftover rice already in your fridge or some farro, any kind of bowl that you want to
Yeah.
do,
Or
quinoa.
quinoa. Yeah.
Exactly. I really do love this idea because I think lamb feels springy. And again, if you don't want lamb, you could choose beef or turkey.
And sometimes the fun of a quick meal is to choose a special ingredient. To me, ground lamb is a special ingredient. And so it's like, okay, I'm doing something really simple, which is a meatball I've had a million times, but that one difference of ingredients makes it feel special for everyone at the table, which is also kind of what we're talking about. Yes, these are 30-minute meals, but they don't have to be ordinary.
Exactly. Well, Sonia, I have a very non-ordinary 30-minute meal, and it comes from Carolina Gellin. And, I love to read introductions to recipes. And so the recipe is lemony peas and dumplings, which I find to be very interesting that you can make dumplings in 30 minutes. And the first sentence is, with no kneading or fussy shaping required, these easy spoon-form dumplings make the perfect dinner in a pinch. And
Wow.
I think, again, we've had Carolina Gallin on the show. She writes great recipes. One of the things that she shared in our episode was how she thinks about how someone who's never spent any time in the kitchen, how she makes sure that she doesn't lose them at some point. And after cooking a lot with my husband, who is a very new cook, I find that her recipes in particular, they really lead you through the recipe with a lot of intentional steps. Here's what's interesting too. The ingredients list, very small. 2 lemons, 4 eggs, about a cup and a third of flour, 2.5 cups of frozen peas. I think this is one of the best kept secrets of spring cooking, which is that most of the time you could just use frozen peas because they'll be sweeter and greener and better. Butter and a clove of garlic. So that's it. This is a very small ingredients list. You get your pot of water boiling because you are going to make dumplings. You zest the lemons in a bowl. You squeeze the juice out. You make the dumpling batter, which is add the eggs to the lemon zest and whisk them to combine. Add the flour, some salt, and a little water. What she says is the dumpling batter consistency should be similar to a sticky, thick, lump-free pancake batter. So you're
Oh,
kind of,
yeah.
if you've made a pancake, you can make a dumpling. I think a really great tip is she says salt the water before you start to add the dumplings to it, and then reduce it to a simmer. If your water is really boiling vigorously and then you start to add these dumplings in, they'll break apart. So she has a little bit of a technique here. And so you're holding the batter bowl really close to the water, and then you're kind of spooning little bits of batter into your simmering water. And then she says after 2 minutes, the dumplings will plump up and float to the top. Then you add the frozen peas to the pot and turn off the heat and cover it for 1 minute. And then you drain it all together, like as you would pasta and peas. And then to the empty pot, you add some lemon juice, you add some butter and whisk it until it's emulsified. And then you add in a little bit of garlic and turn it off the heat. And then you add the drained dumplings and peas and toss it. There's your dinner.
This recipe is so interesting to me because
I
my head
know.
does not go to homemade dumplings for 30-minute meals. Obviously, you and I both rely on frozen dumplings for quick meals, and
Yeah.
there's so many recipes of how to take a frozen dumpling and zhuzh it up and turn it into something else. But to make it from scratch is such a different thing. What's also interesting to me about this is it's not like Spätzle or something like where you're dropping tiny bits of batter into boiling water, which is a pretty quick process too. This sounds like something really almost like in the gnocchi category.
Well, it's funny. She says they are more like Spätzle
Oh,
than gnocchi. She says they're made with a thick
interesting.
pancake-like batter that comes together in minutes, and then you just plop it into boiling water.
But they're thicker like gnocchi as a because Spätzle is so thin and small, right?
Right. Yeah. I really wanted to tell you about this recipe because I trust her recipes to work. And I think one of the other really important things, I was reading the comments too, and one of the commenters was like, the sauce is incredible that you can just take lemon juice and butter. And she's really encouraging you to like vigorously emulsify it until it's really creamy and beautiful. And if you just think about a lemony, buttery sauce with homemade dumplings and peas and a touch of garlic, it's 1 clove of garlic for like a little bit of extra flavor. I mean, what more could you really want? And by the way, this is a 20-minute recipe, which I'm guessing if you're not familiar with making dumplings, it might take you 30 minutes.
And this could be fun for entertaining too, especially if it was more of a casual dinner where you just had a few friends over and someone was hanging out with you in the kitchen and you're kind of putting the last touches on something. Because dumplings always feel festive to me, no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, I would equally say this would be fun to get kids kids in the kitchen. Like
Yeah.
I'm constantly trying to think of how to get my son to be more interested in being in the kitchen with me. If we on a Friday night we're going to make something like this, he would be really interested in it.
Absolutely. Well, Carrie, the next thing I want to share with you is something that I know might not be for everyone, but it's something that has felt kind of like a revelation. Like I never would have thought to make this at home so often, but recently I've been getting sashimi grade tuna at the market, and that can be the basis of a whole meal. And so I'm going to share a recipe for Japanese sashimi and rice, also known as chirashi bowls, something that you can get at many Japanese restaurants. Because I think it's something I get at Japanese restaurants often, I didn't think of it as something I could make at home. And then around Passover, as you know, I was serving tuna crudo for my fish course. I actually got my tuna at my local H Mart, and it's substantially less expensive than at my fishmonger or even the fish counter at Whole Foods or something like
Right.
that. And certainly, if you prioritize the highest quality fish, go to your trusted fishmonger, go to where you like to source fish. But almost every Asian, Japanese, Korean market has a fish counter with sashimi grade fish
With
available.
high quality fish. Yes. And
Yeah, high
that's an
quality.
affordable price. Yeah.
And sashimi grade means you can eat it safely raw if you're someone for whom raw fish is safe. You don't serve
Right.
this to someone who's pregnant, for instance. So there's different kinds of fish, yellowtail, tuna, salmon, all which you can find sashimi grade. And when I was making the crudo at Passover, I was kind of like, one piece of fish can actually serve a couple different people when you slice it thin. And sometimes you can even buy it pre-sliced. And then all you're really needing to do is add your sauce and some sliced vegetables and steam some rice. And if you want to make it real fancy, you can get some salmon roe or some fish roe of some kind. So all of that is also available at the H Mart or Asian market. This is definitely not like I'm saying I'm going to make this every Tuesday, but if I'm looking for something quick that also feels special, this is becoming one of my go to little tricks. I definitely would steam some short grain rice for this, and I like to do that in my instant pot or in a rice cooker, which makes it even easier. And then it's slicing your tuna, unless you got it pre-sliced, topping it with some thinly sliced chilled vegetables. She recommends cucumber, avocado, and poached asparagus. I would even do a little bit of radish on the mandolin too if I want to make this feel extra pretty. And this also recommends like chilled egg omelet, which is very traditional in Japanese cooking. I think you could do a jambi egg instead of an omelet and also have that kind of nice extra little pop of protein, which also helps your fish go
Right.
serve. You can
Right.
get less fish and get more out of your meal. You
And
get those couple
richness.
bites.
There's like a
Yes.
richness to an egg that sort of adds to the fish.
Certainly, people have been making this in Japan since the dawn of time. This is not a revelatory dish for many people. This is something lots of people eat raw fish and rice and egg. But sometimes I just need the reminder that I can do it at home.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that I think to the dumplings, that's not the first place you think of when you think of a 30-minute meal, especially in the spring. But I think what's really interesting about what you're saying is you're investing in an ingredient that is a bit of a shortcut in itself. There's something that feels very special about eating raw fish at home. You're right, it is possible because you can get it at any Asian market or an H Mart, and that's still going to be cheaper if you go to your local Japanese restaurant. And it's a quick meal too. It's a beautiful, quick, special meal that you can make for yourself at home.
If you were like a little squeamish about the raw fish part, you could sear your tuna steak. You could get a tuna steak from any fishmonger. You don't have to go to the H Mart, sear it, and have almost an identical meal that will feel really similar in flavors and textures.
Yeah, and I like that it calls for a little bit of asparagus. I'm eating as much asparagus as I can in the spring because this is when it's the most
This is when
magical.
it's good. You can get it year round, but this is when it's good. And I'm like you, I'm going to eat as much as possible for the next
Yes.
2 months, and then I'll be done with it for most of the year. And the other thing is when you and I are thinking about these 30-minute meals, a lot of time what we're thinking about is what can we do while the rice is cooking? A pot of rice
Yes.
or a pot
Yes.
of quinoa? Or what can we do while the water is coming to a boil for a pasta?
Right. Well, I think that's part of the point of a 20-minute meal or a 30-minute meal is how are you maximizing your time in the kitchen? I think it's really interesting to think about executing a really beautiful dinner like this and really relying on those great ingredients. And it reminds me a little bit of that luncheon that I just catered. And I shared about it on our Substack, one of the things that I did was I bought a large piece of salmon from my fishmonger, but I knew that I wanted to serve it in fillets. And so I asked him to cut all the pieces. And he cut it 15 pieces, wrapped it up, and then all I had to do when I got to the location that I was cooking lunch is add those pieces onto two different sheet pans, add a little bit of olive oil, salt, and pepper, throw some asparagus on, and that was it, and broil it. And so, yes, it was a little bit more of an investment of an ingredient, but it felt really special, and it took me like 5 minutes. I
Yeah.
love this idea that you brought forth. So speaking of fish, I really like salmon. I like salmon in the spring. I think it goes really well with a lot of the spring vegetables. And the recipe that I want to share is called salmon with Swiss chard and radishes. Instead of doing it on a sheet pan, you're actually making it in a skillet. In this case, I would use my cast iron because I love to get a little bit of color. So what you're really doing is you're taking a little bit of butter and a little bit of olive oil in your skillet. You're getting it hot. You're going to add your skin on salmon fillets and get some color. You want to really sear them and then turn them over. And once they've been cooked, then you add 2 bunches of Swiss chard, 2 bunches of radishes, and some garlic. You just cook it down until the greens wilt a little bit and the radishes get like some color on them. And then at the very end, you're whisking a little bit of white wine and mustard together. And then you add that to the pan and you bring it to a boil. And then you sort of simmer it until the fish is completely cooked. And one of the things that really caught my eye about this recipe is they talk about how if you go to the farmer's market in the spring, you see so many beautiful radishes. I do that. And I'm always like, what am I going to do with those radishes if I buy them? You can really only eat so many. Cooking radishes actually turns them into something so beautiful, especially when you add a little bit of butter. That butter kind of counterbalances that pepperiness of the radish. And I think that people are always looking for ways to use up what's in their produce boxes, or if you find Swiss chard, it's so beautiful. So this is an interesting way of kind of using up all those ingredients that you see everywhere at this time of year, but doing it in a quick way.
I love a cooked radish. I don't do it nearly enough. I think it's so pretty to, even on a sheet pan meal, to just add in a couple radishes. And it's a good point. I'm overbuying radishes this time of year because also sometimes they're the only colorful thing at the market.
Yes,
In the
yes.
beginning of spring, there's like rhubarb and radishes, and then everything else is green. And so you're so drawn into that pop of color before the tomatoes arrive and the peppers arrive and all those other, and strawberries and everything that's exciting. But
Yeah.
I completely agree that salmon is just such a perfect vehicle for a quick weeknight meal. And it's nice to hear it done a little differently because my go-to is also some kind of sheet pan meal with some kind of simple sauce. And this sounds like a little bit of a change from the normal.
I'm a person who really loves to cook my salmon at a high temperature in the oven because
Yeah.
I like that crispiness. And so you're really guaranteeing that crispiness by putting it in a hot pan and letting it get really brown edges. And then adding that little bit of white wine and mustard, which I think mustard is also very synonymous with spring. There's so many mustard sauces. Mustard goes so well with greens. It packs a lot of flavor in one little ingredient.
Yeah, it's an easy, like a lot of the things we've talked about,
Yes.
turmeric
Yeah.
or mustard, or just one ingredient that makes a dish have a ton of flavor, but didn't take a lot of tracking something complicated down. These are all easily accessible ingredients, pantry ingredients. I think we're always looking for more of that.
Absolutely. I love talking about these recipes with you because every season there are days when I really need a quick meal, but I do want to eat seasonally and I do want it to feel exciting. I don't want to go back to the same recipes that I'm always going to.
One thing that really struck me is that neither of us brought up pasta, which is usually always on our list of 30-minute meals.
It's true. It's true. I think dumplings are pasta adjacent, but making a homemade dumpling feels exciting to me.
Yeah, it really does. I'm going to try that for sure.
Until next time,
Bye.
bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.